I'm doing it. Hello and welcome to Krackle Comics Weekly number 17, number 18. I don't know anymore. With quarantine, the weeks go by so long and so fast simultaneously. I'm Mike, joined alongside
Daniel.
And Vincent. And Dan has a haul.
All right. So, as Mike alluded to, we are stuck in quarantine. So, I have to go online to order all my stuff since all my LCSs are closed. But I have a haul here from In Stock Trades, 2 weeks worth of stuff. So, I'll go through it pretty quick. First up here is books 3 and 4 of Fatale. I have book 5 and the final volume on the way. So, excuse the glare there. So really excited again, more Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker stuff. So really excited to read this series. So we'll see how that goes. The rest of my stuff is all epics, things that I've been looking to pick up and just never got around to. So I figured I'd get them before they go out of print, like they all do eventually. So first one up here I have is X-Men: Lonely Are the Hunted, Volume 2 of the X-Men Epic line. This collects X-Men numbers 24 to 45, Avengers 53, and Not Brand Ek number 4 and 8. So some really good Don Heck and George Tuska art going on in this book. And obviously at this point, Roy Thomas has taken the reins as the main writer of X-Men. So really excited to read this stuff. Late 60s X-Men should be good. Next epic I have up here is The Mighty Thor, The Black Galaxy. Some more stuff. Thor 419 to 436, and annual number 15. I believe this volume goes up right next to Immortal Flesh Epic Collection, which I picked up last summer. So this just continues that readathon after the Walter Simonson Omnibus, which I hopefully can get around to reading at some point. So there's the back cover, volume 18 of the Thor Epic line. Next epic I have here is Captain America: Blood and Glory. So I believe a few weeks back we read an issue that I think comes directly after, like towards the end of like after this epic. I think I'm not sure if it's I think it might be after it. But this is 410. This is Captain America 398 to 410, and Punisher Captain America: Blood and Glory numbers 1 to 3, which is what the epic is named after. You can see here on the back kind of what that looks like. So really excited to have this. Almost have the entirety of Mark Grunwald's Cap run collected in Epic, which is really nice now. Hopefully that can get finished up and I can start reading all that. And the last one I got here is X Factor, all new, all different X Factor. So this is the beginning of Peter David's run on X Factor. Collects number 71 through 83, annual number 7, and Incredible Hulk numbers 390 to 392. So kind of showing the back cover there. Really excited to read this run from Peter David. And those are all the epics I have. I think next week I'll be getting another haul, hopefully from In Stock Trades, if it ships. And got some more reading ahead of me. So that's all I got.
I think that's the first time that anyone has said a lot of good art from Don Heck and George Tuska.
Hey, don't underestimate Don Heck.
I think it's also the first time that late 60s X-Men is good.
Did I say it was good?
Yeah.
It was good to have. I didn't say it was good to read.
And then the other thing is that that epic for Cap goes through 410. Mm-hmm. The issue we read, which is the end of his, is 443.
Oh, okay.
I think there's 2 more epic. I think there's 2 or 3. I think there might be 3. Which volume is that?
That is volume 18.
Okay, I think Man Without Country is 21 with Mark Waid.
Yep.
So 3 more. All right. Welcome to the show. This week, we are talking about favorite issues. We're just kind of random. It's kind of like a retro show, but not. We just pull totally random issues out of there from any era, any company, whatever, even though they're all Marvel and DC this week at least. And Mike's going to start us out. And we did alphabetize them.
We alphabetized them, but also our one rule was that you can only pick one book per character. So like you can't choose like 5 Batman books.
Yeah.
So I mean, next week, because I think we're going to do this until new books are released. And what is it? The 20th or 27th of May that we're looking at this point.
20th.
So 20th. So until then, we'll do favorite issues. We did retro shows. We just want to change a format. So with this, like if I chose a Superman book this week, which I do, I can't choose another Superman book this week. But like I can choose Justice League because that's different. But without further ado, I think we'll kick things off here. So I chose All-Star Superman number 6. This is Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely. This is the exact midpoint of the series. It's 12 total issues, and just starting out right away, every issue is a 10 out of 10. For me personally, I think this is 11 out of 10 for this issue in particular. But Clark Kent is visiting Pa Kent on the farm. This is like a flashback, and Krypto shows up as they're just kind of talking about life. And the Kent farm is then visited by 3 strangers saying they can help with the harvest. And in secret, they're the 3 members of the Superman squad in the far future. And that's led by Calvin Elder, who really is Cal Kent from DC 1 Million. It's a little odd because like he's not the exact yearing isn't right, but it would like match up later. I think they even like reprinted it now so it matches, so it's the right century. So maybe that was just a goof back then. But Calvin Elder is talking to them, and also there's the 5th Superman from the 5th dimension, and there's one guy all in bandages. I wonder who that can be. So we get a fun moment with Clark and Lana and Pete Ross hanging out at the diner. This is a young Clark Kent trying to still figuring out if he wants to be in Metropolis or not. He's thinking about going back to Smallville and just being a farmer. But he discovers that Calvin has superpowers like him, along with the 5th dimensional Superman and the one in bandages. And they're here to stop this giant monster called the Chronivore. And they warn Clark to kind of stay away because it sucks time from people. And during all of this fight that they're eventually going to have, Superman is robbed of 3 minutes. And in that time, Jonathan Kent gets his fatal heart attack that kills him. So during that time during this time that they're fighting the Chronivore, the Superman in bandages is the real Superman from All-Star Superman, like the one in the present. And he gets to talk to Paul Kent and kind of has this kind of just great send-off conversation before his dad passes away. And then we get the funeral with Jonathan Kent and the 3 Superman squad meeting off. And it's, that's when it's the big reveal that, oh, that's the one that's the real Superman. And then they're visited by other members of the Superman squad who give Superman a golden flower from the planet of New Krypton that is like indestructible. So he rests it at Pa Kent's grave. And like, it's the first, like, you're going to cry reading All-Star Superman the first time. You're going to cry twice. You're going to cry at the end of this issue, and then you'll cry at the end of issue 12. So it's just a tremendous issue. I just want to just highlight the Frank Quitely's art is just perfect in this issue. The landscapes and like are just breathtaking with the endless valleys and peaks of Smallville, Kansas behind them with the mountains, and like the coloring is perfect. It's really just this masterclass of a series. And then like Morrison's on point. Like this might be like my favorite singular Superman story in like 22 pages or something. It's just so brilliant. Just because it connects on so many of these different wacky bars, all in the span of like still holding true to like essential parts of the character. But yeah, I can't talk about All-Star Superman enough. It's great.
Yeah, my All-Star Superman pick would be 10. Just for preferences. But yeah, this one's great. All these issues are pretty perfect. I don't have much else to add.
I feel like that's going to happen a lot this week. Like everything we picked is like well standard and good. So it's going to be like, yeah, it's great.
This is much better death for Pa Kent than in Man of Steel. Much better death for Pa Kent than in the mainstream pre-Flashpoint DC universe.
Is he back yet, or is he still, or the Kent still dead from a stupid car accident? I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not going to read the Superman books. All right, number 2.
All right. So I'll have to get All-Star Superman collected in trade at some point. So, all right. So our next issue here is Avengers number 277, written by Roger Stern, art by John Buscema. And this is probably arguably one of the best Avengers runs that I've ever read. Obviously probably one of the most critically acclaimed runs as well. And this is also the final chapter of the Under Siege storyline, where the Masters of Evil storm the Avengers mansion to destroy the Avengers once and for all. So a pretty basic storyline, but great follow through with Roger Stern and John Buscema. So this issue has our heroes spread thin across the mansion, as we have a few fights that are kind of wrapping up in this issue. We have the bearded Thor going up against Goliath, the evil Goliath, obviously, the Masters of Evil Goliath. We have Cap going face-to-face against the Wrecker. And then we have Wasp and Black Knight kind of attending to Jarvis, who has been knocked out. And they're searching through the rubble. And in this issue, we kind of get the really awkward try to attempt at a relationship between Dane and Janet, which Janet really swiftly denies him every chance he tries. And Dane actually has a concussion during this, so not sure if he's really in the right frame of mind. We get Yellow Jacket, Rita, trying to steal a ship from the Avengers. And we also get this final kind of battle on the roof of Avengers Mansion with Dr. Druid showing up and beating Blackout, who I don't really think he's a really popular villain. He has kind of like his costume looks like a knockoff version of Electro, which I think is funny. And he actually ends up getting zapped in the back by Zemo. Dr. Druid does. And all the Masters of Evil end up failing their respective fights, with Blackout, obviously, like we said, having a hemorrhage due to a fight for his mind between Zemo and Druid, which is pretty dark, I guess, for an Avengers issue. The fact that someone's having a hemorrhage and dies. I think he is probably the only casualty of this whole entire battle. I guess fatality, not casualty. But then we get a heated fight between Zemo and Cap on the roof, as they're kind of exchanging blows, as well as some words back and forth. This Zemo is, I believe, the son of the original Baron Zemo, who was killed in South America way back in the Silver Age of Avengers, where Cap went to go after him, and I believe he died from like a rock slide or something. And then Cap kind of goes back at him and says, Zemo's responsible for me losing Bucky. So we kind of get some more emotions with that. The army shows up at the end, kind of saves the day, arrests all the Masters of Evil, and Zemo falls off the roof and I guess supposedly doesn't die, which is crazy. At the end of this issue, though, is really where it hits home. We get kind of all the Avengers kind of sifting through the damage of the Avengers Mansion. The Wasp is currently like the chairman at this point, so she's kind of like dodging reporters and stuff like that. And we get Cap holding a picture of his mom, which has actually been torn in half in the rubble, and kind of get some really emotional times with him. He's confiding in Monica Rambeau about it, how this was the last picture he had of his mom. And, Monica's kind of just like, we have a lot still to fight for, and people are dependent on us to be the heroes that we know we are. So it kind of leaves it on a high note, I guess, in some way, a hopeful note. And just a great issue. It's a very straightforward concept, like I mentioned before, but the two creators here just deliver with on-point characterization and some just really good moments. Not just the Cap thing at the end, but the exchange between Zemo and Cap during the fight. You really feel the tension there and the motivation behind why they fight. So I know Mike is ordering the collection, so he hasn't read this yet, but I know Vince has some stuff he wants to say. So what'd you think of it?
Yeah, not a ton, but this is an all-star story. This is one of the greatest kind of moments for the Avengers, but also their lowest point. But before Bendis totally overdid it with Avengers Disassembled, I would say, yeah, this is the darkest hour of the Avengers. And even though I think it was interesting to pick this as a standalone, because it really works within the context of the arc, because it really is an arc, even for the era. Though at the same time, I think this works all right standalone. And a lot of that is because those final 2 pages are so brutal and so iconic for Captain America and within the Avengers title. And obviously Stern, he understands all these characters because even though he had a very brief run, he has one of the most celebrated runs on Captain America, even though it's like 6 issues, but whatever. He knows these characters. He knows Thor, even though I guess he never had a run on Thor, I think. And then a lot of these characters are very connected to him. Like, obviously Black Knight had been in the Avengers before and showed up elsewhere and everything like that. But I definitely associate Black Knight with Roger Stern. Obviously, he created Captain Marvel, and then Rita Damara's here, who's she's not on the Avengers yet. She's on the other squad, but joins the Avengers later. And then I was about to ask whether we're going to see her later on the show, but I double checked the wiki, and we're not.
Not yet, at least.
Yeah. This is one of the, that I think this is, it's hard to say the best Avengers run, and maybe we'll talk about something slightly similar to that on a video coming up on this channel soon. But this Stern, Buscema, Tom Palmer on inks, this is really the classic team up for an extended period, at least. Obviously, you had certain heights earlier where George Perez and John Byrne were drawing the book. But this is really this is what I think of when I think of that classic Avengers, not Silver Age, but Bronze Age Avengers. And then obviously it's either this or Busiek Perez. But great storyline.
I mean, I think continuing on with great storylines, it's Daredevil 191, Frank Miller writing and drawing this issue. Interesting note, no Klaus Janson here. It's Terry Austin and Lynn Varley on colors and inks. So, I mean, this issue's found in the third and final volume of the Daredevil by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson complete collections, or the omnibus for Frank Miller. So, interesting note, because I always thought Klaus Janson was on this one, but no, this is Frank's final issue before he then comes back to do Born Again, though. So keep that in mind. But Daredevil is visiting Bullseye in the hospital, and he's holding a .38 caliber revolver. And Bullseye's still paralyzed from their fight with Elektra's death back in 181. And Matt is visiting him and going to play a game of Russian roulette with him. And it centers around the story of this kid named Chucky who looked up to Daredevil. And Matt was working a case for his father, because his father was kind of being embroiled in some mob connections, and Daredevil, Matt Murdock, was going to defend him. And this kid is obsessed with this videotape of the Daredevil and Bullseye's fight on television from one of Bullseye's first appearances. And this spirals down as Matt visits him as Daredevil and then backs up what Chucky believes about Daredevil. And it's all centered around as backing up with doing violence to solve your problems instead of talking your way out of it. And it kind of comes to a head where the point where Chucky even says sometimes that he is Daredevil and envisions himself as Daredevil and going out as Daredevil. And he catches him spying on his dad. So Matt's has to tail him, and he finds that his father is being blackmailed by this guy named Frank Jutter, who pulls out a gun, and then Hank, Chucky's father, pulls out a gun to Jutter, and Daredevil stops both of them and really makes a point to hurt Hank, and then doesn't realize that Chucky's watching, which sends it further even down, because now that Chucky saw that his dad was getting beaten up by Daredevil, he thinks that his dad was bad, while he wasn't. It's a very big gray thing, but because he thinks Daredevil beats up only bad people, if his dad got beat up, that means I must be bad too. And basically a bad psychological trauma for him that he ends up having to get sent to therapy that at least Matt puts up the money for. And then when he was released and everyone thinks he's kind of back to normal, a guy at his dad's sentencing says like one remark too many, and he pulls out a gun and shoots him. Luckily, the kid survives. And at this trial, is also the family lost everything. And it makes Matt Murdock really like think of what all the good he does when it's just spreading violence and preaching what Daredevil reveals to be the gun as they're going back and forth with this game of Russian roulette. And it's the sixth and final round is empty, as he was pointing it at Bullseye, revealing that he was playing Russian roulette with an empty revolver just as a kind of scare Bullseye here. It's just a master class in storytelling. Frank's layouts here are so crazy, where he's like a face close up will be in the background. He's got Daredevil doing flips and the story's moving in different directions with these very creative and vibrant layouts. Some of the backgrounds are just like kind of stark white pages, but like they fundamentally, like just thematically, they work so well in the issue. It's an issue that should be looked at just in a master class in like, this is everything that's great about Frank as an artist on Daredevil and as a writer, just completely coming to a head and forming. I think this is Frank's best issue singularly on the title. I think his writing might be better in Born Again, but he's not drawing Born Again. It's David Mazzucchelli, who, I mean, is a legendary and iconic in his own right. But if you find it, buy Daredevil issue 191. It is so good. I think it's probably the best Daredevil issue of all time, in my opinion. I think it was even reprinted in like Daredevil 500 too. So if you find issue 500 in a bin somewhere, you also have that in a reprint. Yeah, this is just like chef's kiss, just beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to note like just how far like this character Daredevil has come since Miller took over for Mackenzie. And I mean, for something like this, for a book that was Fear and Cancellation to be exploring such a serious and complex theme in this issue is just, I mean, this is just a microcosm of what Miller has done for the character and for comics in general. So, yeah, definitely a great issue to kind of end that whole run he had.
Yeah, I don't have that much to add. You guys covered it. It's a great issue. The part that stood out to me, as Mike pointed out, is the Terry Austin inks, because I didn't flip through all the issues, but I don't know how many issues of the run do not feature Klaus Janson. And in fact, certain parts, I guess probably towards the end of the run, I do know that technically, like, Miller, wasn't necessarily even penciling. He was doing layouts or like roughs and stuff like that. And Janson was finished, like you would call it, closer to finishing than inking. And that was a similar relationship that Buscema and Tom Palmer had on Avengers for a long time. And so, especially since this is like, this is basically this is the last issue, right?
Yeah, this is the last issue before Frank eventually comes back for Born Again.
Yeah, so especially because it's this much further on, it's interesting because I believe after this, there are actually issues where Janson is doing art without Miller after Miller's gone for like a couple issues, and then eventually you get and then I guess you get Mazzucchelli before Born Again for a little bit. So that was very interesting, and I don't know how many other issues in the Miller run are not without Janson, because Janson's there from the beginning during Mackenzie as well. But definitely seems significant, and it's interesting to compare because you definitely see differences. Off air, before Mike made some comparisons to Dark Knight Returns, I think there's even like, this is stretching a lot, and obviously some of it is because there's a prominent use of guns and things like that, but you can even see a bit of Sin City in this issue.
Yeah, it is like kind of this great isolated work of looking where Frank's art's going to transform into. Personally, in my opinion, I think Frank's best art he ever did is the Wolverine miniseries. I think that top to bottom is my favorite style of his work. I haven't read, I can't remember my train of thought, but a lot of people put it was it was an indie book. I forget what it was.
Ronin.
Yeah, Ronin. I know Ronin. I think people put over as that was his best artwork. I still have not read Ronin yet, but I think this isolating Daredevil 191, you'll get to see a lot of what Frank's arts work as when it is more kind of finished style, and then the background face is a little bit more blockier to what you'll see in Dark Knight Returns. It's this kind of great piece of kind of what his whole career will be, I think.
All right, next issue. I think this might be the most modern one on the show. Fantastic Four number 588, written by Jonathan Hickman. There are two stories here. The first one, art by Nick Dragata, second story by Mark Brooks. This is the final issue of Fantastic Four. Actually, it's kind of like the fourth final issue, I guess, because you had the end of Volume 1 with Heroes Reborn, you had the end of Heroes Reborn, you had the switch over from Heroes Return to the renumbering. And so this is the final issue. And in fact, a more true final issue will come later, because despite all those final issues, you never had you basically, I mean, there may have been like 1 month between the relaunches, but you didn't go without Fantastic Four. And you don't go without Fantastic Four right after this. It relaunches as FF, but eventually you do go without Fantastic Four for a while. This is the epilogue of the arc 3, which ended with the Human Torch sacrificing himself against the Nihilists in the negative zone. The main story is mostly silent. Each page takes up a day, goes through a month of days as everyone mourns Johnny. The Avengers rush to find the Fantastic Four literally just outside the negative zone portal, mourning. Reed whips out the ultimate nullifier to try and go fuck up the Nihilists, and the Nihilist just taunts him. The whole superhero community, they show up for a memorial service, and then there's like a statue commemoration thing. Dr. Doom shows up, and there's kind of a bit of status quo change for him in the background. And there's one page where we see Spider-Man swing in to hang out with Franklin, and I'll get back to that. And then there's a cool one where Valeria, she's like at a chalkboard, and she has all the other kind of Future Foundation kids, and she writes down possible replacements for the Fantastic Four. You see a lot of the characters who've been on the team before for short stints, like She-Hulk and Luke Cage and characters like that. And then she erases it, and she's like, #1 mission, kill a Nihilist. And then actually the scene that I've always been slightly unclear on is the Thing like goes out in the desert, and it's Donald Blake, because I guess this is like still like somewhat Straczynski, Gillen Fraction era, I guess. So it's a weird kind of Donald Blake moment for the character. And Bruce Banner, and they turn into Thor and Hulk, and he fights them. And I could never tell if it's supposed to be like a Fight Club kind of moment where like they're letting him beat them up to get his like frustrations out, or if he just like beats them up because he's frustrated, and obviously they turn into their forms to defend themselves / deal with him. There's just a little bit of ambiguity there, in my opinion. And then the issue ends, or the story ends, with Nathaniel Richards showing up from the future, I guess, to mess with his son. And that's the only page really with dialogue. Then the second story is Peter hanging out with Franklin. He finds him on a roof. They go get hot dogs, and then they basically just talk. And he's consoling him by kind of feeling that like older brother figure. And then he draws, the obvious comparisons to his Uncle Ben and how he lost his uncle, and he feels like he knows he could have stopped it. And, that both their uncles, wanted them to move forward and be strong and mean something to other people and stuff like that. And both stories here are pretty brutal. Obviously, everyone pretty much knew Johnny was going to die. The arc was called, the arc was called 3. Also, I think everyone knew he wasn't going to stay dead, but it wasn't really, it wasn't, technically, I'm sure Hickman bullshitted in interviews and stuff like that, but it wasn't I don't remember it really being sold like, hey, the Human Torch is dead forever and everything's different and it's never going to be the same and fuck you and stuff like that. I think like people pretty much knew that it was going to come full circle and something was going to happen. But in the moment, it's all executed perfectly here. It doesn't really feel cheap, at least in this issue and at least in retrospect. Both the art teams on the two stories work really well. Dragata's arc has a very unique look, and I wouldn't necessarily put him on like a mainstream superhero book, but I actually think his style fits very well here because his kind of like weird faces work really well when the characters are sad, if that makes any sense. They kind of have these like droopy, derpy, like sad faces. And then, yeah, this relaunch continues in FF #1 for a fresh twist as the Hickman run, acclaimed as it is, moves forward. This is a favorite issue of mine. Obviously, it's on the show.
Yeah, I remember when this came out. It was a favorite issue of mine back then because I jumped on the board on Hickman's Fantastic Four as the 3 arc was starting, and I remember going to my LCS and like quickly gobbling up all the issues of grabbing up all the issues of that arc before the first polybag book we had in a while. And then this issue came out. It was really, really good. I love Dragata's art in this throughout. I think the sequence and the coloring and the shadow work with the Thing in the desert works really great. I read it as like he's just like beating the crap out of them just because like he just needs to hit something and just then he has his breakdown. That's kind of how I've always read it. But like the scene that's more striking to me is everyone at the funeral, and we get the close-in shot of the Thing just sitting there not being able to do anything at the funeral. That was the one that's more striking to me. And then like Hickman's Spider-Man dialogue is perfect for the story. It's kind of crazy how he had this long run on Avengers, but like the guy has a good voice for a lot of characters in the Marvel Universe for a guy who I think someone gets thrown around where he's writing his version of X character here as he kind of just takes characters and places them. But the guy has a good grasp of writing voices for characters, and the Spider-Man is perfect in this. But yeah, just a really, really good issue. He muted himself.
And I think when Hickman left, basically after Secret Wars, and fans were always like, "Hey, what are you gonna write?" And he's like, "I'm not writing shit." But I think at times he has said that he likes Spider-Man, and I'm not sure that Marvel would ever give Hickman a Spider-Man book, but it could be interesting. Yeah, and it's actually in the last issue, but also like right at the end of the last issue when Johnny quote unquote dies, there's the moment where, and it follows immediately into this issue where basically everyone else escapes the negative zone portal and Johnny stays behind, and Ben yells John like instead of Johnny, like right as he sees like Johnny surrounded, and then the portal closes. And I think that's another really powerful moment. Just cheat a little bit. All right.
I think my favorite sequence. Well, I mean, I just want to say my favorite sequence of this issue was this Reed being defeated, looking at all the screens of like these high-level threats happening, and he's just like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, and also a very like somber and powerful moment, and it's very cartoony, obviously, is one of the early pages actually where Reed tries to comfort Sue, and she puts her bubble up, and his arms just like go all the way around her bubble. That's a very good cartooning moment, and a very sad expression of their powers, which takes some creativity for sure. All right, I have 2 in a row. So this is Ghost Rider Annual #2. There are 3 stories here. The only reason we're talking about it is the main story, which is the bulk of it. Main story is Warren Ellis writing, Javier Saltares on art. This is basically one of only 2 issues during the Danny Ketch run, starting from the beginning up to a certain point, that are not written by Howard Mackey. And in fact, both of those issues are written by Warren Ellis, who otherwise is like a fresh face. He was doing something in the UK, obviously, and I don't know if he had stuff at DC or things like that. I don't think so. So he's just had a few issues of Hellstorm, and I guess they're like, Hellstorm, that's a thing. So like Ghost Rider, Hellstorm technically spun out of Ghost Rider, so we'll give you 2 fill-ins. And then Saltares here is one of the 2 original Danny Ketch Ghost Rider artists. So he fits well here, and he's been gone for the title, like as far as in the main series, for a while by this point. This story is from the POV of Scarecrow, who has a grudge against Ghost Rider, and it doubles as an origin story. It delves pretty deep into his backstory and his character. Shows him torturing animals as a kid, his messed up home life. He's abused by his mother. I don't know if it's hinted that possibly sexually as well. It's kind of unclear. But in the present, because he has this issue with Ghost Rider and his weird ass powers, which are fueled by fear, like he's basically like he's healed by fear, he's powered up by fear. So he has been both killing people and abducting people. And he's basically like tying them up and has made like, at first you think like it's kind of described like he's literally like making a building out of them, but not really. He's just like hanging people and corpses around a building, and all of that death and fear just energizes him. So he's then going to trap Ghost Rider, and they're going to have their final showdown. And they tangle with each other once or twice along the way, and then it's the final fight. And Ghost Rider and Ghost Rider's kind of backed in the corner because Scarecrow's really strong with all the bodies around him, alive and dead. And also Ghost Rider, I think people who don't really know anything about Ghost Rider, they kind of forget that, like he has a flaming skull and he does these penance stairs and he's connected to demons and shit like that, but he doesn't kill people. He's not the Punisher. He's, in fact, like, especially the Danny Ketch version, like he's all about protecting innocence. And so Scarecrow also has him kind of fucked in that way, because if he uses his chain or anything like that, he's going to hurt someone. But he is basically like, he basically just corners him. And then Ghost Rider breaks every single bone in Scarecrow's body. And that's pretty much it. I'm kind of glossing over because a lot of the story here is really just going through the writing panel to panel, page to page, and everything like that. This is one of those really definitive stories for lower tier villain, and I think this is truly chilling shit. Like I think this is pretty good superhero horror, like in like serial killer kind of vein. This is one of the standout stories in that lane, and I think this story really elevates Scarecrow like a lot. This really puts over Scarecrow, and who I guess originally, I don't know who he first appeared in, but before Danny Ketch, I think he was probably most associated with Captain America. I know he was used in the DeMatteis and Mike Zeck run. There's an arc with him or so. But then through this annual and some previous appearances, because obviously it's set up that they have a rivalry, I think he really is a Ghost Rider villain nowadays. And then you have 2 filler backup stories. The first one is by Ian Edgington and Reggie Jones. The second one is by Frank Levesque and Kevin Kobasic. Those are basically like the B-teamers. They do like the backups in Midnight Suns Unlimited or in the Marvel Comics Presents Ghost Rider stories. The first I thought was actually decent. It's about an older immigrant woman. She's this like old black woman, but comes from like a Caribbean background. She's being abused in her neighborhood. There's a bunch of like punk gang members that are pushing around the old people in the community. So she creates a voodoo doll, like a life-size like voodoo thing, and has it kill the thugs. But she's like attached to it. She like directly channels through it. So when Vengeance, which I'm not going to get into, shows up, he's a Ghost Rider thing, and rips it in half, he unknowingly kills her. So it's an interesting kind of gray area thing, which you couldn't do, and it's actually interesting because you wouldn't really tell this story with Danny Ketch, but it makes sense with Vengeance. And then the third story is a Johnny Blaze story, and it is somewhat interesting because it's like a big continuity thing, because it brings back a character, this like witch woman from like some of the earliest Johnny Cash stories from Gary Friedrich. But there's nothing really interesting. I mean, this is like, I mean, Johnny Blaze is in a kind of slightly weird position in this era, and it's just like it's basically like a biker story. There's no Ghost Rider things related to it.
I mean, I only read the main story. I didn't read the other ones, but I mean, this is Warren Ellis just going full out with like, I'm going to haunt your soul. Big shout out to Javier Solteris on the art, though. Like, this is really like the art complements the writing very, very well here with how chilling it does, and like the body strung up on the walls, and you're like, the tension's built pretty high, like to a point like, all right, what is Ghost Rider going to do? Because he can't throw him against anything, because then it hurts everyone that's chained up. But like, yeah, the just the text saying that, like, you get him grabbing Scarecrow and then it just kind of fades out, and it's like he broke every bone in his body and twisted them too, so they won't heal right. It's just like, you can only imagine what kind of pain that would be. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. This is, I think, Vince, you were saying that this is if you find it in a dollar bin, that definite diamond in the rough.
Yeah, and actually, I just want to say one more time. I already said like this puts over Scarecrow, but I think this is also another example of like, I know, like obviously he's scary as far as like his, because this is from his POV, it's his inner narration, and he's doing fucked up stuff. But also, this is one of those examples where a creator takes either a hero or a villain and really like thinks about their powers and figures out like, oh, there's like a genius way how they could use their powers and like be really powerful. Because I don't think Scarecrow has ever done something like this. But in this, even though like he ultimately does get beat by Ghost Rider, and like pretty soundly, granted Ghost Rider is very powerful, but like, you know, he really is presented as like, this Scarecrow is like nothing to fuck with. Like honestly, like if Captain America was in like Ghost Rider's shoes in this story, like Captain America loses, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And you know, there's other examples of that. Like they'll do things like Iceman is constantly like, if you really think about his powers, he's like uber powerful. But Scarecrow here, it's like, this is Scarecrow all the way to the limit. Like this is the most you could do with him. And he's truly terrifying, not just in his words and his actions, but like he's powerful as hell in this story when you really think about it.
All right. So going into our next issue here, we have Guardians of the Galaxy number 20, written and drawn by Jim Valentino. So I might be one of the very few people who has actually read the entirety of the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 stuff, started by Jim Valentino in 1990 and finished up by Michael Gallagher in 95 when it was eventually canceled. So this issue obviously is one of my favorites. This is kind of smack dab in the middle of Valentino's run. And interesting thing to note, and Vince will probably go into more detail about this afterwards, Jim Valentino would actually go on to be one of the founding members of Image Comics. So this is kind of one of his own series that he was working on at Marvel. So in this issue, we have the Guardians back on Earth. We opened up this series to them kind of off-world and different planets and stuff like that. But it's the year 3000, and the Guardians have returned to Earth, and they find themselves face to face with this group of mercenaries who have adopted the, I guess, teachings and I guess actions of Frank Castle, and have called themselves the Punishers, which is pretty on the nose, I guess. But they've actually teamed up with the Brotherhood of the Badoon, which is a ongoing villain that the Guardians are constantly facing against. The Badoon pretty much took over all of the solar system and like enslaved all of Earth and all the other planets. So they're kind of fighting them. And just before this battle is about to break out, Vance Astro, which, you know, we know about having the adamantium suit to encapsulate him since he came from the 20th century. He actually comes flying through the sky in a new identity, calling himself Major Victory now. And he said that this was paying homage to the golden age that he kind of came from back on Earth. I don't know if Vince wants to go into more detail about that, but I wasn't really too sure. I was trying to do my own research on that. I didn't find much of anything on that, but it's the reason why I picked this issue is because, it's a really good turning point for Vance as a character, because up until this point, he was very like downtrodden, very like pessimistic and upset all the time. And we really see a shift in his character in this part of the run once he gets this new suit. And we kind of get an immediate explanation of this, obviously, because, if he has any type of leak in his suit, he could wither and die because his body is preserved for 1,000 years. So any little leak could basically turn him into a corpse in a second. So we find out that he had a leak at one point, and he was taken to this place by this guy named Hollywood, which is actually Simon Williams, aka Wonder Man. He's still in the future. I guess he doesn't die like all the other humans do. And he brought him to the Sorcerer Supreme at the time, who's known as Krugar, who actually like cast a spell on him and was able to allow him to kind of like create this like spell that would preserve his body while also giving him this ability to be Major Victory. And the fight breaks out. We have Vance using Captain America's shield, which the Guardians recently acquired about 10 issues prior. So they're fighting. We also get a shot of Yondu using this like arm cannon that he has. I think he recently got his arm chopped off, and he blasts like a Punisher out of the sky, and he quietly like curses himself for using such a crude weapon. Obviously, we know Yondu has the bow and arrow. And just something to note, obviously not kind of shocking to note, but Yondu's characterization in the comics, at least in volume 1, is way off from the movie. He's very like reserved and spiritual and stuff like that, and we don't see any of that in the movies at all, which is okay, I guess. We also get a team up with Charlie 27 and Hollywood kind of taking down a tank where the Brotherhood of the Badoon leader and the Punisher leader have kind of holed up into to kind of get away from the fight. And Hollywood is just about to toss it and kill them when Krugar steps in and is like, okay, we're not killing these guys. We need to capture them for information. Off on an asteroid somewhere, though, we get some more explanation between Starhawk and Aletta, who famously love to like skim out on these battles all the time, which is really annoying for the Guardians. And the two of them are kind of coming to terms with their dual existence. At this point, Starhawk and Aletta were kind of sharing like a body, kind of like Captain Marvel and Rick Jones, I believe, in the early 70s. So we kind of get some back and forth, some really great, interesting art by Valentino in this part, but a complicated story going on between them and their kids, which they actually lost in previous years. So that's kind of sad. Back on Earth, though, we have the Guardians capturing the lead Punisher and Badoon when one of the allies, like one of the resistance fighters on Earth, actually shoots both of them in cold blood in the tank. And Major Victory is like, what the hell was that? We weren't supposed to kill them. So that's kind of weird. And they end up destroying the Punisher's base in like a huge explosion. And they end up chilling at the Avengers Mansion, which in the year 3000 is a bunch of rubble and ruins. And it is here where they kind of initiate some of the new members of the Guardians team. Talon, who's an Inhuman, he joins the team officially in this issue. The offer is also given to Krugar and Hollywood, but they both decline. But I think they also accept like a little pin, Guardians pin, to like use as like a transponder should the Guardians need them in the future. Meanwhile, Martinex is talking with Mainframe, who is actually the Vision, on like a ship outside of Earth, and they're talking about the idea of a galactic Guardians team, which would actually go on to become its own miniseries later on in the 90s. I believe Gallagher wrote that as well. Could be wrong. And then lastly here, loaded issue. I know the issue ends with a tease of Rancor, who is a really old descendant, not old descendant, but like a descendant of Wolverine, on her way to find and hopefully resurrect Wolverine on Earth after discovering one of his adamantium blades on a planet in space. So a lot of stuff going on here. I think the key draw with this Guardians era is just all the nods and the hints and the connections with the existing Marvel universe. I think it was pretty clever in some points. And that's all I got for that. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that.
Well, if I would have known Hollywood was Simon Williams, I would have definitely been like down on this more, and Mainframe was Vision. Exactly. This is like, now everything you said was cool. Everything I tried to read wasn't. What happened here?
It's all connected.
Yeah, the thing for me is that's actually the stuff where like I think it's cool, but I also don't like it. Like how there's so many connections, like the Wolverine thing and Captain America's shield, and some of it's a little too much. Like I get that there's a Sorcerer Supreme in the future, and I get that, you know, I guess I think it's funny how like if any character was to survive the entire time, that it's Simon Williams and his pure ionic energy and everything. It's pretty funny. And then this was the issue I was hinting at, that maybe we'd see Rita Damara again, but we don't. I guess that's later, or is that before this?
I think she officially joins like during Michael Gallagher's run.
So the part that you don't need to read.
Yeah.
And then Krugar, the Sorcerer Supreme, he's like a tentacle alien, right?
Yeah,
like
and
a squid kind of thing.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention as well is the Ancient One at this point is Stephen Strange, so he's still alive, but he's like commuting from. Yeah. And
what I never because I was like, because I'm a nerd, so I knew like the handbooks and history, like the encyclopedias and stuff like that before I read certain things. So for some reason, when I was younger, I always thought it was weird that there was an Inhuman in the future, like prominently, because like in certain eras in Marvel history, like you don't even see the Inhumans in the present. So it's like, why is there this prominent Inhuman in the future?
Well, you saw and then for a good like 5-year period.
Well, yeah. But then, do you guys recall who voiced Mainframe in the movies?
Miley Cyrus.
Mainframe is in the movie.
Yeah, voiced by Miley Cyrus.
Wait, Mainframe in the movie?
Yeah, but it's not Vision.
I mean, it's a cameo in the very end.
Yeah.
Where?
The second movie.
Is it post credits or is it just at the end?
I think it's like in the mid-credit scene or something. I think.
Oh, the Guardians 2, where it has like 5 of them. Oh, then yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
That was all of these characters that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'll go back to back as well. So our next issue here is Iron Man number 200, written by Denny O'Neil, art by Mark Bright. So definitely one of my favorite Iron Man issues. Definitely one of my favorite Iron Man runs. Denny O'Neil. Anyone who is looking to get into Iron Man, definitely suggest reading that at some point. But yeah, guys, this is the issue that culminates all of O'Neil's run. The second bout with alcoholism, Tony's eventual return. All of this comes to a head in this issue, and coming face to face with Obadiah Stane after so many behind the scenes shenanigans with the chessmen and manipulating Tony. All that comes to rest today with this issue. And we open the issue to Tony and Rhodey kind of mourning the loss of Morley Irwin, who was a former Stark scientist who was working with Tony and Rhodey out in California for this new company that they started called Circuits Maximus. After Stane bought Stark, Morley and Cly Irwin, they were brother and sister. They moved out with Rhodey to kind of help with his work for hire type of stuff. And then eventually, when Tony came back from his alcoholism, all four of them moved out to California to start this new company. So the last issue, we find that Morley was killed in a planned bombing of the facility. And Clyde kind of comes out of the hospital upset. Her glasses are actually broken as she's like yelling at Stark about this whole thing and basically telling him that Stain was definitely behind this and that he needs to do something about it. And this whole run, Tony's coming back from alcoholism and he is so hesitant to get back into the armor because he doesn't want to crawl back into the alcoholism that was associated with that. But at this point, after Stain has done all this and has claimed the life of one of his employees, he actually makes his way to the West Coast Avengers campus to don his new Silver Centurion armor, which is definitely one of my favorite armors. Just so sleek and so clean and just a great design. And he heads straight to Stain International on the other side of the company, or on the other side of the country, excuse me. So we get a great splash page, not splash page, I guess we get a great page of Tony flying up into the upper atmosphere and going down to New York, taking 20 minutes to get there, which is a great kind of display of how updated this armor is. Meanwhile, at Stain International, Stain reveals his armor to a brainwashed Bethany Cabe. Stain has actually kidnapped all of Tony's closest friends and I guess acquaintances. So Stark is storming basically Stain International, and he's able to cloak his signal with this new feature in the Silver Centurion armor, which we'll see time and time again. It's a chameleon effect. It basically disguises himself and turns off any signal that he's putting out there on radar, which is unique. And he makes his way into the facility, actually ripping the wall off of the reception area and basically telling the assistant that Stain, that he's here to see Stain, which is a pretty vicious and savage moment in the issue. And Stain notices that Iron Man's here again, and he obviously knows that it's Tony. So he unleashes a helicopter with a bunch of missiles to attack Tony. That doesn't work. So he then sends his chessmen to deal with him. And we've seen these at the very beginning of Denny O'Neill's run. They are really cheesy. They're not the best, the most memorable lackeys that Tony has ever gone against, but he beats the shit out of them, and there's they start to fall off of their little mechanisms, and Tony catches them. Obviously he's not going to let them fall to the ground and die because he's nice like that. But yeah, at this point, Stain just realizes that he has to go toe-to-toe with him, and we find out that Stain has been working on an armor that he was developing with the help of a notebook that Tony left behind after Stark International was bought by Stain, and he was able to develop his own armor known as the Ironmonger. So the armor makes its appearance for the first time in this issue, and basically the third act of this issue is the two of the characters fighting toe to toe, and Stain at one point is fighting with him and actually tosses what looks to be the St. Louis Gateway Arch at Tony, and Tony basically vaporizes it so that Stain doesn't kill his own employees. And he's able to get away, kind of uses that as a diversion to lure Tony into the inside of the building where he actually has all of his friends captured. And he's basically, this is the weirdest ultimatum ever. He's like, if you move, I kill them. So you're going to either stay there and starve to death and die, or I kill your friends. And Tony was just like, well, I'm lined up perfectly with my chest plate to the electrical input, so I'm just going to vaporize that. And Ironmonger gets away, and as a last gasp of kind of salvaging whatever he has, he kidnaps Gretel's baby, who was the baby that was born in the issue where Tony came back from alcoholism. It's a really long story that I won't go into here, but he uses the baby as kind of bait to tell Tony to stop fighting, and the baby ends up being tossed, and Tony saves him. and we get a huge explosion of Stain International. And just as Stain is defeated, Tony walks over to him to try to capture him, and Obadiah doesn't even give him the satisfaction of capturing him, actually vaporizing his head with a repulsor ray. So there was an issue before this that kind of went into a little bit more detail about Stain's father and how he used to do Russian roulette with a gun, and one day it didn't work out and he ended up killing himself. So I think that was kind of an illusion that like he was kind of getting to with this whole thing with killing himself. But yeah, this issue ends pretty abruptly and leaves a pretty sour taste in Tony's mouth as he moves forward with trying to recover whatever he has left of his company. So that's my long explanation. What did you guys think?
It was odd that they mentioned the part of the freezing from like the first movie. Like Jon Favreau apparently read his shit, so that part was put in. I don't think Mark Wright's mentioned enough as a great Iron Man artist here. The pencils look very, very good and sleek and clean. And then the Silver Centurion armor it's one of mine favorites too. Like it looks so sleek. Like I like the fact that it looks little like bulky, how I kind of think the armor should look sometimes. I'm not a big fan of everything being sleek, but it looks just so cool. And apparently I read somewhere it originally was supposed to be red and black, but they changed it last minute to silver, and I think it really just makes it pop. But yeah, this is really, really, really good.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is great. I think for a long time this was like a forgotten run, the Dennis O'Neil stuff, because everyone knew the Michelini, Leighton, Romita stuff, and then this is being collected for like the first time ever since they've started the Epic Collection line, and it's pretty impressive that basically this whole Stain thing is a plot line that's been going on for 40 issues. Dan, do you recall if they footnote the baby? Because you effectively just did, but I don't know. I don't think I saw that they did.
I don't think they do, but in the previous issue, like you see him, like I think the issue before the one of those issues before they show like Stain capturing all of the characters. So I think that's kind of where that's mentioned. But yeah,
okay, because the footnote would be 182, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I want to say that the Stain International logo is ridiculously ugly, like from a typography standpoint. And again, I believe this was also a slightly oversized issue. It was a big 200. It probably says extra size on the cover. And
as a matter of fact, it does.
Okay, yeah. And as part of that, they split it up into chapters. I guess that was a thing that they would sometimes do even up through like the 90s and stuff. And that format allows it so that at the end of the first chapter, you have a big epic Silver Centurion splash page, and the end of the second chapter, you have the Ironmonger splash page. And the former, they're both cool, but the former one is just really, really great. And there's a little bit of fun too. Like it's still like classic comics. So the part that I laughed at is Iron Man crashes through the wall, and then the secretary's like, "Do you have an appointment?" Who is the redhead who's with Stain? Is that Bethany Cabe?
I thought it was because I think he brainwashes her, and then there's like a follow-up storyline with her and Madame Mask at one point. It's weird
because there's like two redheads in this book. Like one of them's being brainwashed, one of them is with Stain, one of them's in a tube. I don't know if the tube one was also the one that was on the table.
I think
one of them has to be Pepper.
Yeah.
And then here's my curveball question for both of you can opine on. Is Ezekiel Stain stupid?
No. I like Ezekiel Stain.
I like him too, actually.
I don't think he should exist. Also, as I was confirming his name, which I had to do, did you know that Matt Fraction, he did create Ezekiel Stain, but he did not create him in Invincible Iron Man. He created him in The Order, which is an obscure series which was meant to be a relaunch of the Champions, but for a certain period of time, Marvel could not use the Champions for comic book titles, because the Champions is also the name of a role-playing game, and I guess they had some tie-in comic at some point. So Marvel lost the trademark to Champions for like a decade or two.
Interesting.
Right, Jonah Hex number 50. It's the penultimate issue. Well, really, it's the finale for Tallulah Black. It's Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti and Darwin Cook, who draws and inks this issue. Does the cover, 2 covers actually as well. There's a variant he did as well. And the story is called The Great Silence, and it's an oversized 38-page story because it's that big issue 50. If you hit that in modern comics, we gotta reward it. The series would close out with issue 70, so you get 20 more after this, and then All-Star Western was relaunched. But this is the kind of the end of Tallulah Black, which is a character that Gray and Palmiotti created. And just to think who she is, to kind of wrap it up quickly, think like one of the girl that gets her face cut up in Unforgiven. It's like her, but then she becomes like a total badass bounty hunter. Kind of like, and then like think of Sadie in like Red Dead 2. But at the beginning, sees Jonah Hex and his friend companion Tallulah Black after a bounty, where they were sharing a night of passion. And Tallulah's shows up sporadically through the series. I think her first appearance is issue 14, and then she briefly shows up in like a dream in issue 70. But for all intents and purposes, issue 50 is her basically her ending. The next day, Jonah wakes up to see that she's gone, but he's offered 50 bounties to be paid out by a man named Arlen Miston. To just round up all these guys, and he'll get paid $2,000 a head. But Jonah says that his going rate is $3,000 a head, and he can work it out. Flashing to Tallulah, she's arrived in the town of Silver Springs, and she runs into the sheriff named Jim Stroman, saying that she's looking to settle down here as she's now retired from bounty hunting. She kind of develops a little bit of a romantic nature with it. He kind of points her in the direction of the dress shop because she's like wearing all black and got this black eye patch. And looking to settle down, and eventually he helps her like find a house later. Jonah, we get this great montage of like Jonah taking out these bounties in like even more ridiculous fashions. My favorite being like he's got a cannon set out like 2 inches out of an outhouse. It's very like Looney Tunes-esque. Going back to Tallulah though, she's now dressed all in white, and she's building a home with the help of Stroman, and she's also pregnant with Jonah's child. And she runs into this old woman named Abigail Rumford, who's she's this crazy old woman who's like seen the vision of the child from God. So like, things are not going to go out here because she's some crazy cultist lady. The outlaws are all planning on hiding out in Silver Springs. And it just so happens that in the night that Tallulah has to deliver her baby, they're all running in the town. So the sheriff goes out to try to stop it. He's killed. Jonah's like sneaking into the town. But during this kind of all this chaos, Abigail and Tallulah are left alone. So Tallulah is attacked by Abigail and actually gets the baby cut out of her, and she's kind of left to bleed out until Jonah finds her and takes her home, and that's where he learns that she was pregnant. And he's like, "You never told me, so like I'll find the kid, and I'll bring it back. But we're done as friends and lovers at this point," as he feels betrayed. And he goes on the track down. He does track down Abigail. Out of train or she's already captured, and the guys in there like, yeah, we found the baby girl. Learns it's a girl, and she apparently killed it on the train. So she's sitting in there as passengers on the train heard that the baby never cried once. So Jonah's just like, I want to kill her. I want to bring her my version of justice. She's not going to hang for this. There's not going to be a trial. And he starts throwing guns around with the people in the sheriff's office, and it gets to the point where like the sheriff's like, listen, we got rounds to make. We'll be back in an hour. You have tons of time to do what you need to do and get out of the town, which Jonah, then does go and kill her with the line of, there's no God here, only the devil. And he brings back the baby in a coffin and puts it just like kind of just right on Tallulah's porch as like she cries around it. And then Jonah gets a giant Gatling gun and mows down the rest of the men in the town. Just saying his final line in that is that makes 50. So he's gonna go be a rich man, but now he's lost a friend, lover, and a daughter. It's just a really, really good story. Like it's a great closeout, kind of Western tragedy. of this tortured character of Jonah Hex, and then Darwin's pencils and inks are just, you can't praise Darwin Cook enough. He's one of the greats, and I love this series from Graham Palmiotti.
Yeah, this is really one of the obviously, if you're following the retro show, we did a Jonah Hex issue from the classic era a couple episodes ago, and we remarked how it's basically a dead genre, and it was really impressive that this run went 70 issues. There was an OGN, and then technically, in a slightly different form, in a slightly lesser form, in my opinion, it went like another 25 or something like that. But it lasted that long because it had supporters, because it was just amazing. And it really deserves like some kind of recognition from DC, whether that's simply reprinting it, because some of it's hard to find nowadays. And then, it's like All-Star Superman. Like, it's Darwin Cook. It's 100% A+, 10 out of 10. Like, there's really nothing to criticize here. And he's really having fun. Like, there's some ridiculous shit here. Like, obviously at the very end, there's a Gatling gun and a giant explosion. But there's also a hilarious moment where he's tracking some of these guys down, and he's waiting, like drinking alcohol outside, as a guy is opening the outhouse. And Jonah has like a cannon with cannonballs and like a lit fuse, like 2 feet away, the barrel 2 feet away from this outhouse. It's just like fun cartooning like that, and really like captures really the spirit of what I want from comic books. And this was like almost every issue we're talking about, this was slightly oversized, and it feels meaty, but it doesn't feel long. Like, even though that it is oversized, like on a page by page ratio, or like everything that happens, like this is a really dense, and not in a bad way, this is like a meaty issue. Like, you really get, like, if you bought this single issue, you're getting your money's worth and some.
There's a lot of silent pages of just Darwin putting on a masterclass in sequential storytelling too, that moves the story forward greatly. So like, there's not a lot of dialogue to read on the page, but there's just a lot to absorb.
Yeah, I think the whole first section or so. This one also has kind of like chapters. There's like subtitles throughout. I think the first section's silent. But yeah, this is great, and this also definitely works as a standalone issue.
Yeah, I mean, this is just night and day from the retro issue that we read a few weeks back. I mean, this really has piqued my interest in the character, and obviously there's a lot of things going on here that make me interested in it. Obviously, Darwin Cook's art being one of them, but yeah, I mean, just like you guys mentioned, the seriousness of the story with the two, the Jonah Hex and the woman, and then just like the playfulness with some of the scenes, I think is a good contrast, and that's kind of what makes this issue really work for me. Is that it's serious when it has to be, and at the end it still is pretty playful, and you have some really good scenes to kind of go on with what he's working on. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the other artists who were, Darwin did not do 70 issues of Jonah Hex, obviously. The other artists Jordi Burnett was the main artist, and all the other artists who were involved in the series are really fantastic as well. And I think they brought it.
I think Phil Noto comes and does a few issues. Like, there's a lot of guest artists that really like just put a whole bunch of great art into 22 pages.
And I think they brought in a couple classic guys as well for an issue or two.
Justice League International number 8, Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis, Kevin Maguire on art. It's moving day for the JLI. I think this is the first issue, or maybe the second issue, with the actual International put on the book, as there's like 3 different like title numberings before you get to this point. But I feel like this is the beginning of the blah ha ha that originates here as well. And then it's also the origin of Martian Manhunter's love for cookies, particularly the Oreo. And so the Justice League have signed their pact with the UN, and they're moving into these new facilities, and it's just like sitcom based. Everything's going wrong. Martian Manhunter's trying to put together this giant sub basement, trying to put this giant computer down there, and he's falling through floorboards because the building's built like in a really shitty way. And then like Booster Gold's trying to be a help to Mr. Miracle, but it's just a nuisance because he's messing up his wiring and screws up the entire security system, which makes him storm off. Batman and Guy Gardner are at the Russian embassy for the Justice League, trying to set that one up, and Batman just keeps finding like hidden KGB microphones everywhere, going like, "This is ridiculous." And then the blah stuff obviously starts where in Paris, where Booster Gold tries to hit on a girl, and who later is revealed to be like the liaison for the Paris embassy, and Blue Beetle is just laughing the whole time as he's completely made an ass of himself the whole time, and just it crescendos in this beautiful moment of Mr. Miracle. After he's already stormed out, he gets the really new and cool Justice League. They're not their Quinjet, but their giant jet that they'll use to get around places. And he tries to park it on the roof, and it just falls completely through the roof. And Martian Manager has enough where he goes, "I'm gonna go practice an ancient Martian meditating sequence," where he just says, "I'm just gonna go scream in a room," and you actually hear it. It's just a really, really fun issue that I think fully to me, it's the full aspect of turning the Justice League into a sitcom, and putting it all fully together. As it, you can kind of see the pieces of it coming together in those first 7 issues in the annual before that. But I think this issue really puts it all together and makes it really funny. And then the last part is the Global Guardians losing their funding and Jack O'Lantern planning his revenge. But a lot of this is just the Justice League trying to set up their headquarters and just running into the mundane kind of minutia of like hectic things that they would like anyone would run into in like setting up a building.
Yeah, and Fire and Ice make their way over from the Gold Guardians, right? Or at least Fire.
That's later.
Okay.
Yeah, they both will later. That's, I think, in a couple issues. They're not here yet, though.
All right. New Teen Titans number 38. Written by Marv Wolfman and co-plotted to some extent by George Perez and art by George Perez. So this is the story, Who is Donna Troy? This issue, the purpose of it, is supposed to fully address the complicated question that is the title. So here's the backstory. I'm going to try not to go super long on this. So Silver Age Wonder Woman had these weird ass stories where there would be a teenage Wonder Woman or a toddler age Wonder Woman, but through total nonsense, sometimes a combination or all 3 of them would hang out together. So Wonder Woman would be hanging out with a teenage version of herself and a toddler version of herself all at the same time. And the explanation, and it was actually in the issues, is that the Amazonians have some nonsense technology where they can like splice film together from different eras, and it doesn't make sense, but like it's Diana watching film of herself hanging out with herself that her mom has prepared. It doesn't make any sense. But when they were creating the Teen Titans, Bob Haney picked up one of those issues where probably only saw the cover and was like, whoa, Wonder Woman is hanging out with this teenager who looks like her. That must be a different character. And so suddenly Wonder Girl is on the Teen Titans, and there's no explanation for like 15 years. And the actual issue here, we have a very cinematic opening, which I think is very interesting. Like this is the part that feels like it could be an issue today, whereas the rest of it, it's like this is 1980s comic books. And even the coloring, like I think all the choices on these like first 2 or 3 pages, and then you basically have the kind of same thing at the very end. Very interesting. And Donna Troy is being a little weird. She's a little anxious about things because she's engaged. She's going to get married soon to Terry Long, who is this like college professor. And she's like definitely like 18 or 19. It's pretty strange. Like even if he's like a grad student or something, he's drawn as like definitely older, and he's got curly hair. It's weird. It's always going to be weird. It's very dated. And then of course he dies and her child dies. I'm not going to get into that. But Terry Long hires Robin, Dick Grayson, to investigate Donna's past because she doesn't really know her past. And that's kind of giving her anxiety. He thinks it'll help her as they move forward in their relationship and things like that. And so Robin puts on his detective cap, which he's, trained with Batman, obviously. Turns out that she was rescued from a burning building as a baby by Wonder Woman. And we've known that to this point, I believe. And then she was taken to Paradise Island. They eventually, at a certain point, siphoned some of all of their powers to give to her. So that's why she has the same kind of powers. But she was never close to Diana, which they compare to Dick's relationship with Bruce, obviously. And even other characters like Kid Flash and Flash even had a closer connection. And so that's why she's like, she's related to Wonder Woman, but she's not like close. Like she doesn't see Wonder Woman as her mother or something like that. She's just like someone else that she lives with, who was never really there either. And Dick does some nice detective work. I think it's not super interesting stuff, but they give enough real estate on the page and enough variety that like it's Dick Grayson doing detective work, and it's pretty cool. And he finds an old woman who owned an orphanage, and she's never talked for 10 years in her retirement home. They go visit her. She talks. There's a doll that they find, and then there's this like lockbox hidden in the wall, and there's like scraps of paper in there, and there's like this weird backstory with like a child slave ring, which is like never fully explained. But basically, Donna's mother had her very young. She had cancer, and the father was out of the picture. So she gave up Donna to this orphanage. Then a couple adopted Donna. The man died. That man died in an accident, and the woman was really broke. So she like kind of sold Donna into slavery. And then Donna is being held temporarily by some assholes. And then there's a fire, and they die in the fire, and Wonder Woman rescues her. So that's basically her origin. It's like both not super interesting, but it is. It's really the journey in this issue, the detective work, all the links that get you there. And I think it's a pretty great story, but also like it's not like a super standout. Like this is like, it just feels like a strong, mostly standalone issue of a strong run of this era, to me at least. The problem is that this gets screwed up like in a couple years. Unlike Superman and Batman, which had Man of Steel and Batman Year One, post-Crisis, Wonder Woman starts out with her debut in the present and not backdated like those characters. And ironically, to some extent, post-Crisis, Wonder Woman handled by George Perez, written and drawn. But the Titans, on the other hand, just kept on trucking through the reboot, through the Crisis, because they were, one of DC's best-selling titles. Marv Wolfman was in the middle of a fan favorite, acclaimed run. So they just kept going. And it's pretty similar to how Jeff Johns handled Green Lantern through Flashpoint, sort of how Grant Morrison and Scott Snyder did with Batman. Except since the Titans didn't change, now Donna doesn't make any sense, and Wonder Woman changed. So 5 years after this issue, there is the follow-up, Who is Wonder Girl? And George Perez comes back to the Titans temporarily with that story. And then John Byrne fucks around with it later in his Wonder Woman run, which we've touched on a little bit in our retro shows. And then later there is Who is Troya? And I'll just let you guess whether the New 52 changes to Titans and Wonder Woman screwed Donna Troy up even more. So really, Donna Troy was complicated and weird from the very beginning, but this issue, as far as my opinion, totally makes her make sense, totally works, and then they just fucked it up over and over and over again.
Yeah, it totally works, and it's a really engrossing issue. The pacing on it moves great, and I love how it's bookended with Dick Grayson in his apartment at the beginning and the end. But as someone who I liked Donna Troy, but really never knew her origin, this was cleared a lot of the air for me. Is it seems that DC can never really get a good history grasp on what exactly Wonder Woman or her sidekick's origins are, which is kind of a hard thing to always kind of digest, knowing that that's the third pillar character of the company, whether they really pay attention to it or not, which is a sad thing. But this issue is really, really great. I mean, it's Wolfman and Perez on one of the most important runs of the '80s. It's X-Men in this. Those are your big books of the 1980s as far as team books go.
Yeah, I mean, there's really not much else for me to say. I mean, I do enjoy the detective work that Dick is doing throughout this issue. I think that's really kind of on the nose for what his character, I guess, could be and what it is. I mean, I don't really have a lot of background with this whole thing, so kind of seeing it from an outsider's perspective, definitely has me a little bit more interested to check out some more Teen Titans stuff. But I know there's like 3 omnibus out for that, so we'll
5.
see. 5?
Well, I don't. The fifth one's not out yet. I don't think.
No, I think it was solicited. There's at least 4 out right now.
Yep.
Shoot.
But it's all the ones released so far are pretty great stuff. But yeah, I'll just rag just to finish it. Like, people don't talk about it as much, but Wonder Woman being set in the present post-crisis, debuting in the present, it was. I don't know why they did that. It was a mistake, and she just is lucky because it was a very acclaimed run and is a major known run, but ultimately it kind of screwed over other characters more, like Donna. I mean, the whole point of this, well, not this issue, but later on, is that doing that totally screwed Donna Troy and not Wonder Woman really. But the other character that applies to, who did really get screwed, was Hawkman. They did the same thing with Hawkman, where they did an origin arc, and in fact, the actual origin arc, which is the Hawkworld miniseries, is not remotely implied as being set in the present or the past. You assume it's the past. It makes total sense that way.
Hawkman, move on.
And then later they decided, oh, that's in the present, so they fucked Hawkman. All right. Sandman, number 8, written by Neil Gaiman, art by Mike Dringenberg. So Dream here, he's feeding pigeons, he's in a funk. This is actually kind of loosely the end of the first arc. The first Sandman trade is always these first 8 issues. And it kind of touches on what he's been doing, but not really. And this works pretty much standalone. He's in a funk, and a goth girl walks up and sits next to him. And she starts talking about Mary Poppins. She makes fun of Dick Van Dyke's infamous British accent. And then we get to talking about the actual plot. And what's interesting is these first 8 issues, or at least the first 7, which we didn't read, are often referred to as the weakest part of Sandman, and like it's considered a slow start, but also like it's one of the greatest comics of all time. So just it's not that bad. And then there's the reveal that they're siblings. This is Death and one of the Endless, and I don't know how many other ones have been introduced so far at this point. He goes and basically follows her around, doing her job for a while. He's shadowing her as she does her job. She's Death, so she goes and collects the dead. There's an old Jewish musician. There's a comedian. There's a newborn baby, which is a really fucked up moment. There's folks in hospital beds, people killed in alleys. There's drug overdoses. There's like a painter or maybe a window washer who falls off a skyscraper. And then in the beginning they were at a park, and I forget what the landmark's called. I think this is in New York. But there's also something similar in France. I don't. It doesn't matter. They're a landmark. It's got to be New York. I forget what this thing's called though. And there were kids playing soccer in the beginning, and then they're back here at the very end. And in the beginning, before they leave, this one kid's like trying to flirt with Death because she's this like cute goth girl, and she comes back, and he's like, "Oh, you're back," and it's like, "Oh, he just got hit by a car, and he's fucking dead." And that's her final person that she picks up. And this is a great issue. I mean, the art, Mike Dringenberg, it's not a name that you really know outside of Sandman, but all the art is pretty great. It's very moody. The scenes that are very emotional are done well. There's a lot of great cartooning. The design for Death is obviously incredibly iconic, and the characterization, both in the writing and the cartooning, especially on Death, is fantastic. and then I will have a gimmicky moment where I stand up, and this is the shirt I'm wearing. That's the second wear. I said I screenshotted the panel and said it would be relevant. So that's that. First appearance of Death. Cool little key issue.
I can remember reading this back my freshman year of high school as like the only comics they had in the library were all of Sandman. And I think it was either 1 through 8 or 1 through 9 in that first trade. But yeah, this does wrap up the first arc as an epilogue pretty well. But the introduction of Death is certainly very, very iconic down to the character and the look. It's a run everyone really should read. It's one of those kind of like, I think, gateway books of like rites of passage books that everyone should read this at some point. And I just remember being just taken away by just like how cool the whole thing was. But also, I always thought it was interesting that I think people forget this, that Death is actually Dream's older sister, as it makes sense as the humans they obviously dealt with death more so than they had the ability to dream later on, which I always thought that was another neat thing as well. But yeah, it's just a really, really good issue of a conversation between a brother and a sister that obviously with people with dream powers and death powers. And I always remember the moment with the baby dying always got me. Like that was the crib death is always like really, really haunting to me.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's more than just this, but like you read this issue and you understand why this series and why Death is so important to goth kids. Like she's just she's just perfectly designed and a really fun character.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and
you didn't mention Malcolm Jones III on Inks here. I think compliments Mike Dringenberg really, really well.
Yeah, and then I'll finish saying that the woman that Death was kind of like modeled on, I think she passed away last year. Which is obviously not great. All right, I kind of almost forgot that we have one more issue, so we do have one more issue.
Wow, I'm offended. Anyway.
Bring us home, man. Bring us home.
Bring us home. All right, so finishing up our week of our favorite issues is Ultimate Spider-Man number 13, written by Brian Michael Bendis with art by Mark Bagley. So this duo would go on to, I think, write over 100 issues. Go on to do about over 100 issues of Ultimate Spider-Man, which was awesome. In this issue, though, Peter Parker reveals that he is indeed Spider-Man to Mary Jane, who first is in laughing disbelief and is then in absolute shock when Pete starts jumping on the walls to display his powers. He reveals to her that he was bitten by the spider at the school trip, and MJ kind of comments that she could have gotten the same powers too. And, Pete obviously goes over with her how he can't reveal it to the world because he has to protect the people he cares about the most. And they almost kiss each other when Aunt May busts in to break up the hanky-panky, as what she calls it. And because she supposedly believes them to be doing that in his room. Obviously, that's not true. MJ leaves after a pretty awkward conversation with that. And the best part about this, I guess, is kind of how Aunt May kind of comments on how much she likes MJ as a person, and also throws in that Pete's parents met in high school. So kind of a heartwarming moment there at the end. This issue is very simple. The scenery doesn't change. It's all in Pete's room. There's no fight scenes. There's nothing like that. It's just a very simple issue of Pete explaining this to her, and definitely showcases one of the distinct differences between the Ultimate Universe and the main Amazing Spider-Man universe, with Pete kind of revealing his identity to his closest friends and lovers at such an early age, which I think kind of, I don't know, it adds a different dimension that was kind of missing there in the original Amazing Spider-Man run. Nothing really else to say. I mean, Brian Michael Bendis, I'll have you guys duke it out.
I think Mike will finish with a little more different perspective. I like this. This is one of my favorite issues. This is kind of early Bendis. It's early naturalistic, his whole naturalistic dialogue gimmick. It's the whole question, yeah, question, yeah, like that kind of thing, pitter patter, back and forth dialogue, TV style. I think it gets clunkier and also comes off way worse when he does team books. Like, when you have an Avengers page and it's 10 people having these conversations and there's 3 conversations at the same time, or like very later on where it just like almost becomes a parody of itself. This is kind of early. This is early on, and I think it works well here as far as on the dialogue angle. And then, yeah, Dan said like this is basically it's basically a bottle episode, which you would never really see this in like a issue from 1974, but like that was just like, this is issue 13, and this was, by this point you knew that that's how Ultimate Spider-Man was going to be, because despite the fact that Ultimates was like constantly late, Ultimate Spider-Man was always on time and everything like that. And they basically did the origin, like basically everything that happened in like 8 pages in Amazing Fantasy 15. They did it in 7 issues, kind of 12 issues. And so this was going to be super decompressed. Every arc was going to be like 7 issues. And that was the beginning of this era. This is like 2001 or whatever. And so, if that's the way it's going to be, I think this is one of the few good examples of decompression and of like really stewing with like more character and dialogue moments for a whole issue. I think there's fun moments. There's comedy. This is an ultimate thing, I guess. I don't like MJ being called Mary. That's like a pet peeve of mine. It doesn't work to me at all. And obviously, I'm a huge MJ fan, and I'm a huge fan of their relationship. And also, I think that her knowing his secret identity works really well. And so I think it is an interesting twist here. But also worth noting that like MJ and Pete don't quite work out super well in this universe. Well, in comparison to how they did for a while in the main universe. I like this. I think this is like, I didn't have any problems with Bendis in 2001.
I don't think many people had problems with Bendis in 2001, but knowing him now and going back, I find this almost unreadable. I don't like this at all. I think you totally waste Mark Bagley's work by putting the same panels on the same page multiple times with this stupid decompressed TV dialogue. And when you isolate this, looking at the fact that Vince brought it up already. They took 7 issues to do the entire origin of Spider-Man while it was done in 8 pages. That's already, the fact that it takes 7 issues for him to get in the suit is already a big blotch mark on the book for me. And then this whole issue, nothing happens other than MJ finds out Peter's Spider-Man. That's it. And it doesn't leave the room. And if you were to compare this to another series I just read called Invincible, in issues 22 and 23, so much is packed into those 2 issues that forward the story, but also have this conversation between Mark and his girlfriend Amber that actually is treated like how people actually fucking talk, that it feels much more mature and much better and grown up and not like half-assed. I don't know. I just don't like. I'm getting to this point with Bendis where outside of Daredevil, I don't know if I like anything he's ever written. And that can't be true because I like the beginning of New Avengers, but now I'm scared to go back and read New Avengers because I didn't like what I read last week, and I certainly didn't like this. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Mark Bagley's Spider-Man when he's jumping around and fighting people, but you're wasting Mark Bagley when you have 2 characters sitting on the bed in the same 17 panels repeated. So I can't. It's not a shock. I know people like this book. It's a great series. This issue, I just don't think works for the way Bendis wrote it.
Hot take.
Hot take. I mean, I backed up what I said.
I'll add 2 more comments. One is a revision note in response to something I forgot to address from Dan. Yes, Bendis and Bagley broke the Stan and Jack Fantastic Four streak. That's worth pointing out because I'm not sure when we'll read Ultimate Spider-Man again. And
No
number
wonder
2,
they broke that streak when Mark Bagley only had to draw 4 pages and they could just repeat it and move the panels around.
That's the thing. Like obviously, I agree. If you're a superhero artist, like show us some superhero stuff. I agree with that. But I will actually slightly tug back on some of what you said, that I actually think that Bagley, if you're going to do this story, I think Bagley actually works well here, because I think Bagley, especially in this era, his cartooning, his facial expressions are actually pretty solid. And I think he does a good job here.
But
and
if
I'll
it's
compare.
written like a TV show, everything's shot reverse shot, which is don't ever do that, and that's the whole issue, and that's why another reason why I don't think it works.
Well, sure, but I will compare that later Bendis, you have the same thing where you have these bottle episode issues, you have these dialogue only issues, but later on with certain artists and with good artists did get to a point, and I don't know if it was deadlines or the artist not caring or editorial pushing it or even Bendis saying do this, but you did get to a point where you literally had repeated panels. Like in some of his later, in Bendis's later Avengers work and X-Men and Guardians and stuff like that, you did have sequences where there's a panel with dialogue and here's the exact same fucking panel with the characters in the exact same position, like literally statted, copy and pasted with different dialogue. And I will say sure, like some of the staging isn't super exciting, but Bagley doesn't do any of that here.
The infamous facial hair bros page is one to always bring up. That's a classic of what you just said there.
And the other thing, and then I'll just say that as far as like one-off Ultimate Spider-Man issues, because there are not that many, because again, like every arc is like 7 issues or something like that. And we read the Ultimate Clone Saga, which granted was a lot shorter than the real Clone Saga, but I think that was like 10 issues. I mean, it's not like Bendis really crunched it down. But I will say so that said, there's not that many standalone Ultimate Spider-Man issues. There's another one which I think is really, really good. I think it's issue 28. I know Dan has read Ultimate Spider-Man somewhat recently. Dan, that's the one where he's like constantly like I forget what he has to do. Maybe it's something to do with Aunt May, but he's constantly getting distracted. Like there's something coming up the whole day. I don't know if you remember that, but that's a really good issue. I think it's 28. But then I want to say it's 50. There's one of the other major standalone issues of Ultimate Spider-Man is really bad. And that's when he swaps bodies with Wolverine. Oh. And that is a terrible issue. Incredibly dated and didn't work back then.
Yeah, I remember that one.
But I like this issue.
Really, the universe isn't good, and I think at this point in 2020, I think we've all realized that the Ultimate Universe was kind of a huge waste of time. Outside of Ultimate Spider-Man, what good came of it?
Well,
and now looking here, maybe not all Ultimate Spider-Man is as good as we say.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. All right, that's our show. At least next week we'll do the same format. It might actually only be 2 of these, but we could always randomly return to it. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.
Oh, we're not doing picks?
Oh. Yeah, I guess we are. My pick. I don't know. All the things I picked were good. Actually, I'm gonna give it to Jonah Hex. Actually,
I'll give mine to Sandman.
Am I allowed to give mine to my own book that I picked, or no?
You're allowed to.
You're allowed to.
Just to trigger everybody.
But we did shun you.
Then just to trigger everybody, I'm gonna do Ultimate Spider-Man number 13.
I knew you were. Listen, that's the you best of the worst. You pulled that one out, so it works.
I did.
I just thought it was interesting how Mike and I chose books we didn't pick, and then you
making that
ruined it.
a rule. So I would be like, we can't account for everyone to read everything.
All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time. Same format, same time.
Same.
Not really. Bye-bye.